We all know that feeling. You see some quick fix, some simple formula that promises to solve a really complex problem, like mastering a skill or, figuring people out. That can be so tempting.
Oh, absolutely. And the whole self-help world is kind of built on these, isn't it? These supposedly easy paths, especially for learning or becoming more influential.
Which leads us right into the material you brought up, these excerpts from. Lays out this very detailed step-by-step system for achieving quite a bit, if you believe the author. Now, our goal here for this deep dive, it isn't just to walk through the steps. We're aiming for let's call it a ruthless, maybe even brutal critique.
Right, putting it under the microscope.
Exactly. We want to really dig into the logic, see if there's any actual evidence for the claims, and look hard at the potential downsides, the flaws.
Yeah, we need to ask, do the author's points actually make sense? Is the time investment the system demands really worth it? Are there, contradictions or places where it just simplifies things way too much?
Okay, let's jump right in. First big point. It's magic requirement, desire, and reminders. So the author says wanting to learn is good, but not strictly necessary. Necessity can do the job. But then they say, spend 5 minutes every single day visualizing this desire, affirming it. So, hang on. If desire isn't essential, why spend daily time, trying to drum it up?
That's the immediate question, isn't it? And let's quantify that. 5 minutes a day, every day. That's, around 35 hours a year? Just sitting there wanting to learn before you even start the actual learning. Is that efficient? Especially if, like the author says, you don't strictly need the desire anyway. Seems odd.
It feels a bit like it's working against itself, doesn't it? Yeah, and here's something else later on. The author actually admits they struggle to consistently apply their own advice.
Oh, interesting.
So this magic requirement of desire is so key. Why the struggle? Even from the author. It kind of suggests that just wanting it isn't the magic fix they paint it as.
Yeah, that really pokes a hole in the internal logic, doesn't it? If desire was the main driver, you'd expect more consistency, especially from the person who created the system. Their own struggles sort of undermine that whole first point.
Okay, let's move to point 2. Rapid read, then thorough reread. The pitch is that this saves time, but still gives you deep understanding. For a, say, 20-chapter book, they suggest 1 hour for the quick read, then 2 hours per chapter for the deep dive.
2 hours per chapter.
They claim this saves time, but let's actually look at the clock.
Right. So 1 hour up front plus 20 chapters times 2 hours is 40 hours. So 41 hours total for one book. Now, I know I mentioned 60 earlier based on the original text's phrasing, but even 41 hours.
Yes, 41 hours.
Is that really rapid? I mean, for someone juggling a job, family, whatever, dedicating over a full work week to read one book twice. That doesn't sound like saving time to me. Maybe rapid compared to what? Some undefined alternative.
And there's this sort of undercurrent, isn't there? That learning must be this difficult, laborious thing. Almost like if you actually enjoy reading something, you're not learning properly.
Exactly. Which is psychologically interesting, right? Because isn't it often the case that enjoyment actually boosts learning? Better retention, more motivation? Dismissing that seems, unnecessarily restrictive. Maybe even counterproductive. Okay.
Third point, frequent reflection and application. Now, reflection and application, sure, these are important, we know that. But the advice is just...
Frequently?
Yeah, frequently.
What does that even mean?
Is it after every paragraph, every chapter, once a day? It's so vague.
Without a clear definition, how can you even figure out if it's practical? Or how much extra time it adds? Like we talked about, even short pauses add up significantly over a whole book.
Right, which bumps up that total time investment again.
And here's the brutal truth bit. Reflecting is good, obviously, but stopping constantly, doesn't that just risk getting bogged down in analysis paralysis? Totally. You can end up spending more time thinking about what you just read than actually moving forward and absorbing new stuff. It can really slow you down.
Yeah, it feels like there's a real risk of the system just becoming inefficient, maybe even overwhelming, without clearer guidance on what frequent actually looks like in practice. All right, number 4, crayon warfare on the text.
Love the name.
It basically means going to town on the book, highlighting, underlining, notes in the margin, the works. Now, okay, active engagement, active recall, that's proven stuff, and it helps. But does everyone need to treat their books like a battlefield?
And there's that subtle little dig in there, isn't there? The implication that if your book isn't covered in markings, you haven't really read it, haven't truly engaged.
Right. It's a bit judgmental. And even if we're conservative, say 15 minutes a chapter for all this marking, on our 20-chapter book, that's another 5 hours added to the total. That extra time spent physically marking always, like reliably, lead to significantly better understanding for every single person.
Well, that's the thing about learning styles, isn't it? Some people thrive on visual cues, marking things up. For others, it's just distracting noise on the page. A one-size-fits-all rule like this just ignores that completely.
Good point. Okay, point 5, repetition and review. This acknowledges the forgetting curve, totally real. We all forget stuff. But the proposed schedule, monthly reviews plus daily glances at notes, it just feels intense.
Yeah, aggressive is the word used, I think. And when you do the math, you could be looking at anywhere from 50 to nearly 90 hours of just review every year. Well, that's like dedicating a full work week, potentially 2, just to going over old ground. Is that really feasible if you also want to keep learning new things? Seems like a huge maintenance cost.
Here's the justification part, the brutal truth maybe. Yeah. The author basically uses their own apparently poor memory as the reason for this super intense schedule.
Right. Like, I forget things easily, so you need to do all this constant reviewing.
It doesn't exactly fill you with confidence in the core learning method itself, does it? If you need that much review just to keep it in your head.
And relying on personal anecdotes as proof. That's a classic weakness in this kind of advice. What works for one person, especially the author selling the system, isn't automatically universal truth or solid evidence.
Okay, point 6. Shaw's observation in active learning. They quote George Bernard Shaw. If you teach a man anything, he will never learn it. The idea being, learning has to be active, not passive.
Which, the active part is true. Learning isn't just soaking things up.
Sure, active engagement is crucial. But the way it's framed here implies that passive learning, like listening to something or reading an article, is totally useless.
And that's just not accurate, is it? It's an oversimplification. Passive exposure is often how we build foundational knowledge or get introduced to new ideas in the first place. It's not like it's either active or nothing. They work together.
Right. And the time estimate for consciously applying everything. You calculated something like 180 hours a year. That feels ambitious.
Especially when you remember, again, the author's own admission about struggling to apply things consistently.
Yeah. There's a big gap between the prescribed ideal, constantly apply everything, and the messy reality of actually doing it day to day.
It's a common pitfall in self-help, isn't it? Telling people the ideal behavior without really grappling with the practical challenges of making it stick.
Okay, point 7. Gamification via financial incentive. This is the idea of betting money on whether you'll actually use what you learned. You need other people to hold you accountable.
This one immediately flags the reliance on external motivation, doesn't it?
Yeah. What does it say about the system, or maybe your own self-awareness, if you need to basically bribe yourself or rely on the fear of losing cash to actually follow through?
The assumption seems to be that your own internal drive isn't enough. You have to outsource your commitment, and the potential cost maybe $260 a year on these bets.
And the brutal truth of it, it feels like it turns learning into this high-stakes performance, driven by fear of loss, fear of judgment from your accountability buddy, rather than, genuine curiosity or desire for growth.
It feels fragile, too. Like, what happens if you start making bets? Does the learning just stop if it's all propped up by external pressure?
Point 8 brings in a Wall Street banker's self-examination. The story goes, this successful banker spends 2 hours every week reflecting on mistakes and successes.
Reflection's good, sure, we keep saying that.
But the leap to assuming this specific practice is the main reason for Wall Street success, that seems like a huge stretch.
Absolutely. First, that's over 100 hours a year just on self-scrutiny. Is that the best use of that time? And second, attributing complex success, especially in finance, to just one habit. It ignores everything else: market conditions, connections, skills, timing, luck.
Yeah, all those other factors. And are those 2 hours always productive, or could it just become like unproductive navel gazing if you're not careful?
It's a fair question. Without a really clear structure for how to reflect and what to do with the insights, it could easily just be spinning your wheels.
Okay, last point, number 9. Triumph recording the brag book. Basically, keep a detailed log of every time you successfully apply a principle.
Acknowledge success, good. Positive reinforcement, fine.
But the level of detail suggested, names, dates, exact results, feels like a lot of administrative overhead for what exactly?
You figured about 6 hours a year just documenting wins. And the brutal truth here, it kind of feels like it's designed for people who really need that external pat on the back. Like, recognizing your own success internally isn't enough. You need this formal record, this proof. It suggests a reliance on external validation for your feeling of accomplishment.
Which kind of loops us back to a bigger issue, doesn't it? This central contradiction running through the whole thing. Well, sells itself as this way to achieve more natural learning or genuine connection. But the actual method demands constant, conscious, deliberate effort. It relies on external nudges like bets and accountability partners, and this super detailed, almost obsessive self-tracking.
I see. Yeah. Truly natural interaction or intrinsic motivations doesn't usually need that much management. It's very structured, very engineered for something aiming at natural.
It's a real tension, isn't it? Organic goals via a highly artificial process, exactly. And when you tally up all the time sinks we've talked about, the rereading, the pausing, the reviewing, the weekly audits, the triumph logging, setting up the bets, it's a massive time commitment overall. And the author just sort of implies, oh, but it'll make you so much more effective, it's worth it. But where's the proof? There are no metrics, no baseline comparisons. It's just an assertion.
That lack of measurable outcomes is maybe the biggest hole in the whole thing. How do you know if it's working? How do you even define more effective in a way you can track? Without data, it's just hoping for the best after investing potentially hundreds of hours.
It also seems like it could create a lot of internal conflict, cognitive dissonance. The author admits we have natural ways of doing things, but then tells us to force ourselves into these pretty unnatural, rigid routines.
Right, like you're constantly fighting your own instincts.
And the way people often resolve that kind of conflict is by just believing harder in the system, right? To justify the effort, even if there's no real proof it's working.
Which makes it feel, like you said earlier, almost like a faith-based system rather than something grounded in results.
Let's quickly hit those brutal truths again. That magic phrase, I don't blame you, presented as empathy. But doesn't it feel a bit like a tactic? A way to disarm someone and get them on your side rather than actual understanding?
It can, yeah. Is the connection built on that kind of phrasing really authentic? Or is it just manipulation site?
A technique and a triumph logging, okay, feels good to write down a whim. But does it tell you why it was a whim? Maybe you would have succeeded anyway without using their specific technique that day. Correlation isn't causation.
You can't isolate the variable that easily in real life. Attributing success just to the system is a big logical jump without more controlled evidence.
And the Wall Street banker story. It's one anecdote, one person. That's not proof a system works for everyone. It's classic selection bias. Maybe this guy was already set up for success for a dozen other reasons.
It really highlights the problem of relying on single success stories. You need way more than that to validate a whole system.
Which circles right back to the missing metrics. The text gives you no way to objectively measure if you're actually getting better at learning or influencing or whatever the goal is.
Yeah, that's the core flaw. To know if any system works, you need, at minimum, a starting point, a baseline. You ideally need a comparison, like a control group. You need to track the input, the time you're spending. And you need output, actual feedback, real-world results.
So without all that, any feeling of, oh yeah, this is working, is probably just confirmation bias kicking in. You've sunk the time so you want it to work, and you start seeing evidence for it everywhere, even if it's not really there.
Precisely. And ultimately, maybe we should reframe what this book actually is. Forget the fuzzy language about connection. Maybe it's really just a social engineering toolkit.
Ooh, sure.
Focus on increasing your influence in very specific situations. And if that's the goal, then the demand for hard proof that it actually achieves those specific outcomes becomes even more important. Is this toolkit effective or just elaborate?
Okay, so wrapping up our ruthless and brutal critique of what we found is a system that's incredibly demanding in terms of time, relies on some shaky logic, offers very little real evidence, and seems to contradict itself quite a bit.
While bits and pieces might have some value on their own, the whole package requires a huge commitment and a big leap of faith, with no clear promise of a measurable payoff.
And the big takeaway really is the importance of bringing that critical eye to any advice like this. Don't just swallow it whole.
Right. Question the logic, demand the evidence. Think about the hidden costs, like all that time we calculated. Consider the unintended consequences.
So here's something to think about after this deep dive. What are the hidden costs, the unproven assumptions, hiding in other self-help or influence strategies you've come across? Those ones that seem so simple on the surface.
Yeah, that's a great question to carry forward. Keep doing your own deep dives. Question things. Analyze them. The more we all do that, the better we get at spotting the solid advice from the fluff.